friends, my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to the first video in March. Happy March. We've made it into the spring months. I say this and there is still a lot of snow on the ground outside because, you know, Canadian, but I digress. Spring is on its way and I'm very excited. Today I'm coming at you, as you can tell by the title of this video, with my February wrap-up and my March TBR. I ended up reading more books in February than I did in January, which was already an incredible reading month for me, so I don't know what's happening. My reading is just going off the charts. I read 14 books this month. So the first book I read in February was The Queen of Sorrow by Sarah Beth Durst. So I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars and I really enjoyed it, but it was my least favorite of this trilogy. This is the end of the Queens of Renthia trilogy by Sarah Beth Durst and I adore this trilogy with all my heart. I love the fantasy world and I love the plot that is pulled into it. This one was my least favorite, but it was a good way to wrap up the series, I think. This trilogy is about a queendom that needs a queen to control all the fairies and fairies, they're not fairies, spirits of the world, because they are the kind of spirits that are just out for human blood. And we follow Delena, who has this power to control the spirits, and she goes to the academy to become a queen. Definitely pick these up. I really enjoyed them a lot. The writing is really good, but let's keep going. The next book I read was actually a reread. Oh, that is Scythe by Neil Shusterman, and I really enjoyed this one. I actually got this one on Audible to listen to again, and it changed my original rating. I remember not like super being blown away by this when I first read it, I believe in 2018. But I enjoyed it. I think the first time I read it I either gave it 3.5 or 4 stars, but this time I gave it 4.5 stars because it is really just a book that makes you think and is really intriguing. I will say I still am not very connected to any of the characters, but I liked the plot enough that I think it's fine. Hopefully the next book will be better because I would like to connect to some of the characters, you know? But if you don't know, Scythe is the first book of a trilogy that concerns basically this utopia of a world where all these people can't die. We've like reached the peak of humanity's technology and all that, and so they have in this world scythes who are ordered to kill a select amount of people every year, or glean a select amount of people every year to control population. Citra and Rowan, the two main characters of this, at the beginning are picked to be a scythe's apprentice against their will, and this is the aftermath of that choice. Them learning to become scythes, which is interesting. And I really enjoyed this, and I'm excited to get to Thunderhead because I hear that's a lot of people's favorite books in this trilogy. So, and continuing on with trilogies, because apparently that's just all I read for the first part of this month. I ended up reading the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, which is the Well of Ascension. This is by Brandon Sanderson. I adore this book. It was so good. Just like Mistborn, I ended up giving this one 5 stars, and apparently I'm losing my voice. Oh no. But yes, this one I gave 5 stars. It was so well thought out. I really enjoyed how it had a plot on its own. This is just like, a lot of times I find second books in series or middle books in a series feel like bridge books. They don't have their own plot, which is something that I'm going to talk about about another book that I read this month, but this one did not. It felt like its own story, which I think is so fabulous, and it just expanded on the world in this, and I love it. So if you don't know, the Mistborn trilogy is about Vin, who is a Mistborn, and to be a Mistborn you have the ability to burn all different types of metals. I think there's 12 in this world, but they only really use 8. There's the thing, it's very complicated, but I love this magic system so much because it is so specific and it has so many rules and has consequences, which is so perfect. Like, this is how you build a magic system. But anyways, so it's about Vin, who is a Mistborn, and she is recruited by Kelsier in the first one to be part of this like group, and they're going to basically overthrow the Lord Ruler. And this is a world where it's basically the aftermath of the big bad taking over the world, and it's like he's just wrecking everything. The world is ash, has no like natural colors and all that, so it's really good. And this is just the aftermath of book 1, and It's great, and I won't spoil it for you, but I highly recommend you pick up this fantasy series. It's so good. So the next book I read is my favorite book of the year so far, and probably just will be, and it is one of my new favorite books of all time. And it took me most of January, most of February to read because I was just taking it so slow and I was just absorbing everything, and it made me love the feeling of reading again. And that is The Soilless Seat by Erin Morgenstern. As you can tell, or you don't know if you can't tell, but I went through it and I tabbed it up really intensely, wrote all my notes, annotated this book, and it is one of my favorite books I've ever read. It is so gorgeous, and I don't know what I was expecting going into this, but it was not what I got, and I love, 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 love this book. I said basically when I was reading, I was like, I love how we start with such like a normal concept and then we just slowly sink into this world, and by the end of it we are messing with time and magic, and it's incredible, and you're like, how did I get here? It's just so good. So basically this is about Zachary Ezra Rollins, who is a boy who's going to college, and one day he is in the library checking out books and he finds one and he starts reading it, and it is called Sweet Sorrows, and there's a story about him in it, and he's all freaked out by it, and there's just, it's all these stories around the Soilless Seat and this book, and then it takes him on an adventure to figure out what the Soilless Seat is, and we just keep going, and he meets Dorian and Maribel. I don't know how to pronounce that. Maribel? It's fine. And they go on an adventure, and it is so heartbreakingly beautiful, and I love how interspersed in this book we have the Sweet Sorrows stories that we get at the very beginning. We get the stories of other characters that like all piece together, and we get another story, like another book in there that like also has relevance, and it all links together, and it's all beautiful, and it's just a giant puzzle piece, and I can't wait to reread this. I think I'm actually going to pick up the audiobook and listen to it because I've heard the audiobook is really cool because it's a full cast, but I could talk about this book forever, but I have a lot more books to go. So let's keep going. I love this one. The next book I read was actually an eARC I got from NetGalley, and it is The Two Lives of Lydia, Burt, and this is by Josie Silver, who wrote One Day in December. This bad boy, you can't really see it because of exposure, there we go. This bad boy that was so good last year. And when I heard that Josie Silver was coming out with another book, I knew I needed to get my hands on it. I originally went into this thinking it was more of a romance because that's how it's been pitched around the internet, and it's not. It is a story about Lydia Burt, who on her 28th birthday loses her fiance in a car crash, and it is the aftermath of that, of her coming to terms with her grief and her getting back into her life. But it's complicated because about 2 months-ish after this car crash, she's still at home, she's still on the couch, she hasn't slept in her own bed, she hasn't really slept at all, she's just a shell of a human, and her mom and her doctor end up like getting her these sleeping pills, and they say please try them just because you need to sleep, your body needs to heal, and as well as your mind. And so she does, and upon taking the sleeping pill she finds herself in an alternate universe where Freddy is still alive. And so she lives between her asleep world and her awake world, and it is this story and this journey of just how she comes to terms with this loss and finds herself again. So I guess in that way it's a romance like with herself in a way, like, and there's like a little bit of romance in it, but not enough to call it a romance, but it is so good. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, 5 stars. In between there, 4.5, because it's not like my favorite book, but it was so good. And the way Josie Silver can write just like emotion that hits you with a sucker punch is incredible. The next book I picked up was actually for my book club pick. I picked Persuasion by Jane Austen, and I'm so glad I did because I love Jane Austen. I don't know if you knew this. I have read almost all of her work. I think the only one I haven't read is Mansfield Park, which I plan on doing this summer. I love her writing so much. I love her stories. I love the worlds that she creates of just these little pockets of female life and Regency era life. It is just amazing. This one is not my favorite of hers, but it was so fabulous. So this is her last fully finished novel that she did before she passed away, and it feels like a culmination of all her work. There are vibes of Pride and Prejudice, there are vibes of Emma, there are some vibes of Lady Susan, which is what she wrote when she was younger. Like, everything is in here, and we have elements of every book. Like, we have a letter element. I hated all the characters except for Anne and her love interest, Freddie Wentworth. I loved them so much. Everyone else was a mess and terrible, but that's fine, because that's usually how it goes. We have a lot of juxtapositions with other characters in Jane Austen's work against the main girl, and it shows how amazing she is. But yeah, loved this, and I'm so excited to talk about it with my friends. The next book I read was totally on a whim. It was not part of my February TBR. I had it on my shelves, and I've heard so many people talking about it on, like, Twitter and all this kind of stuff, and that is the Guinevere Deception by Kirsten White. And I started this, and I got about 75% of the way through and was like, what's happening? Why is this so slow? Am I gonna hate this book? But then the ending just, like, hit you, and then I sat with it for a while, and I realized that this is not like a typical fantasy, not a typical YA fantasy. It's a slow fantasy. It's a quiet fantasy, which I kind of love a lot, and I loved this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, which is amazing, and I loved it so much. So it is basically a retelling of the whole King Arthur and Camelot and Guinevere story of medieval times. Guinevere is actually not Guinevere, she's a magic user. I think people have called her a changeling, but that's never used, like that term is never used in the book, but it's really cool. And she basically is, at the beginning of this book, tasked with marrying King Arthur to protect him from this unknown magical force. So we also have a gender bent Lancelot in here, and I love Lancelot. She's my favorite character in this entire book. I love her. And King Arthur is also incredible. He is just like the sweetest man, but he's also so one-track minded. Like, he's the typical hero who just doesn't really pay attention to anything else unless he's staring at it. Like, he's great. He reminds me a lot of Hercules, which is probably that same archetype actually, but really loved this. And then, in that same weekend that I read Guinevere Deception, I ended up reading The Revenge of Magic by James Riley. You will recognize this book if you watched my Books Choose My Writing Prompt video, because I picked this one up for one of the writing prompts, and I ended up just being like, oh, actually I kind of want to read this, so then I read it, and it was so good. It's a middle grade, and it is so encapsulating and so good. It says here on the front, Brandon Mull, who is the author of Fablehaven and Five Kingdoms, blurbed it and said that this feels like the start of something big, which is so, so true. It feels like we're just on the cusp of something huge with this book. So it is basically about a boy in this world. What's his name? I forget his name. Fort. How can I forget that? His name's so weird. It's like Forsyth Fitzgerald, which is insane, but everyone calls him Fort. Fort, he is in this world. He's 12 years old, 13 years before this world, like, magic was reintroduced into this world by all these books that were found around the world accompanying these, like, magical beasts, skeletons, and people riding the skeletons. So 13 years later, Fort is with his dad at this, like, monument in Washington, and there is an attack from these creatures, from the, like, huge, massive creatures. As you can see from the cover, there's a giant fist, massive creatures, and they come and they basically take his father. 6 months after this, he gets approached by this professor, Dr. Ops, to join them at this magic school to learn magic. And you would think it's a little Harry Potter-esque, but it's really not, because this school looks like a military camp. And it's really interesting because the kids can only learn 2 branches of magic. They can either learn healing or destruction magic, because those are the only two books they have at this school in Washington. And there's also another kid there who's from the UK who knows telepathic magic, I think, or future. He could see the future. He's a seer, basically. He's also there, and it's their adventure after that, and it was very good, and I think I gave this 4.5 stars. Definitely pick it up, because this is a fantastic middle grade series that I haven't heard anybody talk about. This is the author who wrote The Story Thieves, which is another one that I haven't heard anyone talk about, but great book. After that, I ended up reading The Lives of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. And I won't talk about this a whole lot because I talked about it in my Reading BookTube's Favorites video, where I read Reagan from Proust Project's favorite books. This was part of that, and I loved this. I gave this 5 stars, so go check out that video if you want to hear more and you want to see me reading it and ranting about it, because it is so good. So good. Following on that same train of the Reading Reagan's Favorites video, I finished The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and I have no words. Again, go watch that video if you want more thoughts, because I read it pretty much throughout the entire video because it is so long. It is 1,000 pages, so I read like the other books in between, but fantastic book. 5 stars. Amazing. So the next book I read was for the Lovely Ladies I can never say that word. Lovely Ladies Book Club. We do live streams every month where we discuss romance reads, and this month we read Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. That book was fabulous. I read it on Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy of it, but it was so good. I usually have a little bit of an issue with YA contemporary books because I don't particularly enjoy reading about teenagers and the love of their lives, because I'm a cynic. So I was a little skeptical going in, but this book was everything. It took everything that I loved about adult romances and put it into this incredible book. It is about 2 kids who are basically like, it's a little bit of Romeo and Juliet retelling, a little bit. So the 2 main characters, we have a boy and a girl. I don't remember their names and it's gonna kill me. I'll put them on the screen if I figure it out, but the girl is the daughter of the huge chain of this burger restaurant, and the son is this, the boy is the son of a little deli in New York, and they basically have a Twitter feud together, and they have, like, it's just fantastic. It is that story, as well as like a talking to someone in a chat room type story that you don't, like an anonymous chat room that you don't know who they are type story, and like, it's so good. It's so good. I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars. It's incredible. Definitely pick it up and join us, because you will have time, because we are meeting on March 14th, so join us. The next book I read was another eARC from NetGalley. I read In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. This one I had high hopes for, and I am not a big fan of it. I gave it 3 stars because it was still a good book and a good story, but I had issues. It felt unfinished by the end of it. It felt like we still had half a book to go, which I wish we did, because then we would have gotten more character development, we would have gotten a better wrapped up ending, we would have had a better character arc at the end, because it ends so abruptly, and it's such a negative, like, terrible down negative arc, that's what it's called. And I just was so mad when I finished it, but it was very emotional and very hard-hitting, and I cried the entire time. But the beginning was also really slow for me, and it's such a short book that I was like, what is happening? The pacing was off, the writing was a little weird, it kind of grated on my eyes a little bit, which is weird to say, but yeah, so I didn't really enjoy it that much, but I still think it's a good book, which is a weird combination to think. Basically, it is about Dani, who is at the prime of her life. She has an interview for a job that she knows she's going to get. It's her dream job. She knows her boyfriend is going to propose to her, and the night that he does, she falls asleep on the couch, and for an hour she ends up waking up in 5 years ahead, and she's in a different apartment with a different man with a different ring on her finger, and she panics and basically comes back to her life 5 years before and decides it was just a dream. She goes to therapy, she tries to figure it out, but it's just a dream. And so 4.5 years later, she meets that guy, and things ensue from there, but it is not a romance. This is a friendship story. It is about Bella and Danny. Bella is her best friend, and it's just heartbreaking, and it's good. Read it if you feel like you can handle a lot of heartbreak and if you can handle books about cancer, but I was angry at the ending, so 3 stars. And we're down to the last 2 books. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry that this video is probably so long already, but anyways, the next book that I read was Keeper of the Lost Cities Never Seen, and again, I love this series with all my heart. You guys have heard me talk about it before on my channel. This is book 4. This is a series about Sophie who she can read people's minds. She's got telekinetic abilities. Telekinesis? Is that the word for it? Whatever. I don't know. She can hear people with her brain and she can move stuff with her brain. It's cool. But one day she finds out that she is an elf and she gets taken off to this world, and there's a mystery around who she really is and like who her parents are and what she's been created for, and there's a mystery and there's like rebellions and all this kind of stuff, and she goes to school to learn how to do the elf things and the magic things, and it's amazing. This is book 4. It continues that same story, but I've been thinking about it more and more and more, and I was so disappointed by it. Like, it was still entertaining and enjoyable to read, but I was very disappointed by this book itself. This, as I was saying before in this video, feels like a bridge book. It feels like a book that was just written to get information between the previous book and the next book. So I'm hoping that the next book is better, which is fine because I have it. Keeper of the Lost Cities Lodestar. I'm excited to get to it still because this is one of my favorite middle grade series ever. But I ended up giving this 3 to 3.5 stars. Because yes, it was enjoyable, whatever, it just didn't feel like it had its own story, and I didn't like where the story went in this one. We will see where it keeps going, because it was still good. I still like Shannon Messenger's writing, I still love this story, I still love the characters, so we're gonna keep going with it, because it can only go up from here. And the very last book that I read in February, which was yesterday, I read it all in one sitting because I had the audiobook on my Libby app, and I enjoyed it a lot, but again, wasn't like a super favorite of mine. It is The Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. This I was reading and I was about 100 pages in, and I was like, do I DNF this? Do I go read something else? Because I'm bored. And so basically it is a memoir of a Victorian girl growing up in the Victorian times, and it feels like a real person memoir, you know, like it's real life, it's all this kind of stuff, except in this world there are dragons. That's the only thing that's different. It's not really fantastical. I don't know what genre to put this in because it's not fiction because there are dragons, but it's not general fiction because there are dragons, but it's not fantasy because there's no like magic or anything like that. It's just because there's dragons in it. They're just another species of animal in this book, which is really cool. And I'm glad I finished this book. I'm glad I stuck through it because this story is so cool. It feels a little bit like a textbook because you have so much information about these dragons and it's very scientific, but it's written in a way that's very easy to understand, which is so cool. And I'm glad I read it. And I ended up giving it 4 stars? 3.75 to 4 stars. As I said, I was bored in the beginning, and I think it was a pacing thing, but because it's a memoir, it does feel a lot like the Jane Eyre type of memoir, which has the similar pacing to this. I don't know. I was just bored at the beginning and then really intrigued by the end when they were actually dealing with dragons. So who knows? Alright, so that is all the books that I read in February. I read so many and my voice is losing itself and I feel like I've been talking forever. But we are not done yet because I'm going to go over my March TBR. I have 2 eARCs from NetGalley that I have to read this month, and that is Legacy of Ash and Where Dreams Descend, both of which I'm very excited about. Legacy of Ash is an epic fantasy, and Where Dreams Descend is a YA fantasy, but like not really. It's more of the Caraval vein, I think. I'm not going in expecting it to be like high fantasy, so there's that. I would like to read The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab because I picked it up recently and I'm very excited about it. I love her writing and I need to read more of her books for sure. I'm also going to read, hopefully, The Paper and Heart Society, which is a booktube book actually. I'm very excited to read Lucy's book because it just seems like perfect. It's very like Jane Austen inspired, and she loves classics, so I'm very excited about them. I'm also going to read The Merciful Crow. I have had this one just on my radar for so long, and I need to read it to figure out if I'm going to like it or hate it, because I've heard so many polarizing reviews about it, so we shall see. I'm also going to read the final book in the first Era Mistborn trilogy, The Hero of Ages, which I'm so excited about. So excited about. I can't wait to see how this trilogy is going to end. It's going to be so good. I'm also going to read for my classic of the month. It is an Edith Wharton. It is The House of Mirth. It is the only Edith Wharton I have on my shelves. I was inspired by Lucy Parry, so I'm going to do that. I'm also going to read Thunderhead, which I was going to read in February, but I didn't, so just moving it to this one. I'm also going to read Fixer Up, which was on my February TBR. Again, just moving it to this one because I do need to read it, and I do want to read it. I'm also hoping to read Illuminae by J. Kristoff and Annie Kaufman, I believe, because it's been on my shelf and I feel like I need to read more sci-fi, and I feel like this book is going to be a really fast read because it is a multimedia read, so hopefully I can get to that one some point this month. I'm going to also read A Room of One's Own, which is by Virginia Woolf. It is just an itty bitty book. It's one of her essays, one of her extended essays, so I felt the need to add it to my TBR because it's short and I feel like I need to add more classics to my repertoire, and I love Virginia Woolf, so it should be done. I'm also in the process of rereading Pride and Prejudice, so that's on this list, and there are 2 slots empty in here because I believe we're going to pick Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey for the Lovely Ladies Book Club this month, and then I'm not sure what my friends are picking for this month to read yet, so that is also open as well. So I have like 15 books on my TBR this month. That's a lot of books. I don't think I'm gonna do it all. But anyways, I have been talking for way too long, so I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you're feeling like it, subscribe, like this video, and comment down below some of the books that you read in February, some of them that you really, really loved, and if you read any of the ones that I talked about today, because I read a lot and I would love to chat with you about them in the comments below. Stay kind and keep on reading.